Nations have the right to exclude immigrants for any reason whatsoever. That is the conclusion of the argument I'm going to be trying to summarize today. To be fair, this is not my own original argument. This is a summary of an argument given in an article called Immigration and Freedom of Association by Kit Wellman. So Wellman is arguing ultimately that a nation, a sovereign nation, gets to exclude immigrants on whatever grounds they want, with one proviso which we'll mention later in the video. But for the most part, nations get to control immigration however they choose. So let's start with a couple of examples. These are two cases that were in the news over the past decade or so. The first case is the case of the Boy Scouts of America. Well, the former Boy Scouts of America. They are now Scouts of America because they have chosen to allow girls into their ranks. Okay, that's case one. Here's a second case. This is from a university in California that kicked a prominent Christian organization off of campus because that organization decided that you could not be in the leadership of that organization if you were not Christian. Okay, that's two cases. Now, we could argue about the ethics of those cases. Was the university within its rights to kick the organization off campus? Was the organization within its rights to exclude non-Christians from leadership of the club? Similarly with the Boy Scouts of America, were the Boy Scouts required, or were the Scouts, or were the Boy Scouts at that time required to become the Scouts of America, that is, to allow girls into their ranks? So it's really important that we get clear on what the question is that we're asking. We need to distinguish at least three things here. Whether someone has a right to do something, whether they are obligated to do something, and whether it's good to do something. You can have rights to do things that you don't have a duty to do. You can have a right to do something that it's not even good to do, right? So think about clear cases where someone has free speech, right? So where someone has the right to say something. People have the right to say lots of things that they definitely don't have a duty to say. And they even have the right to say lots of things that it's not even good to say. So you could say things that are very mean to someone, right? We won't even go to the worst cases that actually get controversial, but you have the right to say something rude to someone. You certainly don't have an obligation to say something rude to someone, at least if you don't have good reason. But it's also in many cases not even good to say something rude to someone, especially if you have no good reason. I think that's part of the concept of rudeness, right? Is that you don't have good reason. But you certainly have the right to do that. So we're actually arguing, this actually makes the question much clearer and makes these examples much clearer. We're asking, do the Boy Scouts have the right to exclude girls? This is not the question of whether they ought to include girls or whether it would be good to include girls or whether it would be good to do the opposite of those things. We're asking, do they have the moral right to do that? Again, and this is also, we should make this further distinction. The question of rights, we're not asking that in the sense of legal rights. We're asking in the sense of moral rights, not what is on the books. We're not doing constitutional law here. We're asking what sort of laws should be the case. What do they have the moral right to do? Do they have the right to exclude girls? Does the Christian organization have the right to exclude non-Christians, at least from leadership or even from membership? That's not what the case was about, but we could ask that question. And that's the question we're asking. You can think that it's bad for them to do that they're violating a moral duty, but you can still think they have the right to do it. So those are some cases to start with. These cases are central to Wellman's argument because ultimately they're about the same sort of right that he thinks is involved in a nation's decision to curtail or cut off or restrict immigration. And that is the right to freedom of association. The right to freedom of association is a right that we all think individuals have. So to take one case, think about the instance of marriage. you are within your rights to deny marriage to anyone who comes trying to marry you. So if someone wants to marry you, you are within your rights to deny them. In some cases, maybe it's not good to. Maybe it's not the right decision. Maybe it's harder to think of cases where you have a moral obligation to marry them. But maybe in some cases, you do. But regardless of all that, you still have the right not to marry them. You are within your rights. Similarly, groups have the right to freedom of association. So think of a mosque that wants to exclude people who are not Muslim or who do not pray in the way or practice in the way prescribed by that particular mosque or that particular school of Islam or whatever. That mosque has the right to exclude people on that basis. And that is because they have the right to free association. So here is where Wellman's argument kicks in. He says, well, if we think that groups have that right, we certainly think individuals have that right. Groups are just groups of individuals, and we certainly think groups have that right. Why would nations not have that right? A nation, after all, is just a group of individuals. Now, it's in flux, right? There are people being born into that nation. There is, in most nations, immigration and things like that. But at any particular time slice, it is just a group of individuals. A determinate group of individuals. So why would that group of individuals not have the rights that smaller groups within that nation have? So Wellman argues. He thinks that nations have the right to free association, and that just as at the individual level and the group level, that includes the ability to take in whomever you want, and the right to exclude whomever you want. So nations have the right to free association, and it entails the exact same things. They can take in whomever they want, and they can exclude whomever they want. And just again, this is distinct from the question of whether it's good or whether they have a moral obligation to do so. It is a consistent position to hold that nations have the right to restrict immigration however they want, but that they shouldn't resist. It is a consistent position to maintain that nations have the right to restrict immigration however they want, but that they morally ought not restrict immigration in many ways, or that it would not be good to restrict immigration in many ways. That is a consistent position, and Wellman's position is just that they have the right to do so. So, are there any limitations to his argument? Does he hedge in any way? There is one limitation. And you might be thinking, is it really true that on this argument nations have the right to exclude someone for any reason? Could that nation's reasoning for their exclusion be blatantly racist or discriminatory against a group's religion or other demographic features? Well, Wellman here argues that largely no, but only in a confined set of scenarios. And that set of scenarios is this. If a nation contains citizens, or even residents, I suppose, in a certain group, demographic group, they would not be within their rights to exclude citizens from outside the nation that also fall within that demographic group. For example, if a nation contains black people, that nation is not within its rights to disallow immigration from other black people into the country. If a nation contains Christians, it would not be within its rights to disallow immigration into the country from other Christians currently not in the country. And the reason is that it would be a deep kind of humanity-denying insult to those citizens it already has. So you might have thought he gets the right conclusion there. You definitely can't exclude Christians because they're Christians or black people because they're black. But he gives an interesting reasoning for it. It's not because it would be an affront to those immigrants trying to gain access to your country. You're totally within your rights to exclude them just on their own sake. It's because it would be an insult to your own citizens who fall in the same ethnic or religious category as those people seeking entry into your country. So now at this point you might think he got the right conclusion for the wrong reason. If you're opposed to his argument here, you might think, whatever your reason is, that you don't have a right to exclude a certain group of people. It has to be about those people. It's because it's violating their rights. And Wellman thinks you're not violating their rights, those people seeking entry into your country, by disallowing them. You're just violating the rights of your own people. You're creating this deep insult to them, saying that there is this feature of them that you consider not worthy to be in your country. So in this sense, Wellman's argument assumes that the only sorts of rights you would be violating by any sort of immigration policy are the rights of your own citizens. So that's Wellman's argument, and I'd be curious to hear what y'all think in the comments here. Is the argument sound, and where is the problem in this argument if you do not agree with the conclusion? Because Wellman has given us what looks like a valid argument for the conclusion. That is, individuals have the right to free association, and if individuals have the right to free association, then groups do. Nations are just groups, so nations have the right to free association. If nations have the right to free association, then they have the right to exclude potential immigrants for any reason whatsoever. And so nations have the right to exclude potential immigrants for any reason whatsoever. So where is the flaw in this argument if you disagree with the conclusion? At what point does the argument falter?